Hello, welcome to my bookshelf, and today I wanted to do my review of Eliza and Her Monsters by Francesca Zappia. I absolutely love this book. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, so let me tell you what this is about. So our main character Eliza is a high schooler, and she's also this creator of this amazing webcomic called Monstrous Sea. And she's been anonymous online. So she published this as Lady Constellation. So people don't actually know that her real name is Eliza. So she's been able to kind of live, typical teenage life. And in real life, she is kind of this shy, weird person. She's not very social. She doesn't really have any actual friends at her high school. She has friends online, but that's pretty much the extent of her social life. And she absolutely loves making this webcomic, and it honestly is just her passion. And a new kid arrives at her school who happens to be a really popular fan fiction writer of her webcomic. So now there's this kind of interesting dynamic where she has to figure out how to handle that. It's kind of a weird situation to be put in. She's never met a fan in real life, and she has to figure out, should I tell him, should I not? She kind of has to deal with all of this. So things happen from there. So that's kind of the main setup of the story. And I really, really enjoyed this book. And one of the reasons for that were the characters themselves. They were just really interesting and unique. For instance, there's kind of the trope of, being the awkward, shy person in school, and that's more or less what Eliza is. But I like that her interactions with this new kid at her school named Wallace, he has more or less social anxiety, and so he doesn't talk in front of people he doesn't know, especially in big groups of people. And so he finds it a lot easier to write things down. So when they meet and everything, he just physically writes it down and hands her a note, even though they're just right there. So in some sense, everyone was texting at school. So even at their lunches, they're just writing to each other instead of actually talking verbally. And I like that it's not just some random quirk, there's a reason behind it. And it also kind of hints at something else that this book kind of fully develops later on, is this discussion and exploration of different mental health issues. Not only what it looks like, but also how these characters deal with it, the good, the bad, the ugly, and also, at least at some point, how to effectively deal with it. Because I think mental health issues are mentioned in books or shown in books, but they're not necessarily ever shown how to actually deal with it in a healthy way. And so that was really refreshing and nice, especially being a counseling major. This is really exciting for me to see in a book. And I thought that, from my understanding of these disorders and, this experience, that what was shown in the book felt real on some level. Everyone experiences things differently, but I do think that what was shown was authentic to what some people experience. So I thought that it was done really well on that aspect, and I did appreciate the push for seeking treatment and getting help for it, and not just, suffering in silence, if that makes sense. So it was really, really good on that aspect, and that honestly is what pushed it from a 4 to a 5-star to me, because I think about halfway through the book, you don't necessarily know where the story is quite going yet. And at that point, things are developing and building up, and in some aspects, it kind of felt like a pretty standard YA romance. So I think it was done really well, actually. At that point, I was just a little disappointed that the story, which was really interesting in the beginning and has some really interesting ideas, I just was afraid that it wasn't going to be fleshed out. But I did think that it did by the end of the story. I felt like everything that had been set up at the beginning was used at the end for a specific reason, a specific message. It was just really well written and really well done, and these characters were great and well-rounded. They just feel like real people on a lot of levels. Admittedly, they're quirky and different, and honestly, we don't necessarily get a lot of depth from all of the characters. A lot of the side characters are a bit underdeveloped, which is, I guess, a critique I would have. But at the same time, I don't know. There's some side characters that make sense to be underdeveloped. For instance, and this doesn't really matter that much to the story at all, but Eliza makes mention that she really doesn't know that much about her brothers and thinks that they hate her and things like that. So they don't really have a relationship. So naturally it makes sense that we don't really ever see them together much, or we really don't know anything about them, because Eliza admits that she doesn't even really know anything about them. So that makes sense. But like for instance, her friends, which this is a really interesting thing as well, like she doesn't have any friends in person. So she is, close friends to these people online, which is fine, but I feel like we didn't really get enough build up of their friendship. Their friendship was ignored through a lot of the book, and that was supposed to be kind of this unusual thing for Eliza, because she normally spends all this time with them, and they are really close. And it was supposed to be kind of this like shocking thing that she wasn't talking to them as much and things like that when things started to happen. But because it wasn't built up enough for me to be shocked by this change in behavior, just being told that she spends a lot of time with them all the time but not really seeing it, I don't know, it's hard. Maybe there isn't really a good way to really demonstrate that in a book without it being like really, really long, but I don't know. I feel like that could have been better and built up, and I feel like I would have liked to have known them better, since they are her best friends and we don't really know them, so it just felt weird that they were more or less at the same level as like her family that she pretty much ignores all the time. So that was kind of weird. I do have some mixed feelings on, the character development, but I think that the development that is there for our main characters is really well done, but because that's really well done, I think it did, suffer for the side characters, but ultimately it's about these main characters, so, it could be better, we could be more well-rounded with other characters, but at the same time, I think it's okay, because the main story is about our main characters, so the important thing is that they're developed. Though obviously a critique could be that the side characters could be developed more too. I think that would have benefited the story. But I do think that the characters that are there are really interesting, and they have really relatable issues. The internet is beyond huge, right? And obviously it changes how we live and how we act and how we experience the world around us. And that's more or less a running discussion throughout this book. There's kind of this generational gap as well. Older adults tend not to spend as much time online as younger people like us. And so now there's just a change in how we communicate with each other. And because the older generation is used to one way of communicating with each other, like they don't understand this new way, and they don't appreciate it and think it's as valid as their way. And while I think there's pros and cons to both kinds of communication, whether it's like online or like in person, I do think that both are valid, and I think it's important to realize that, but I think there's a lot of difficulty in doing that in real life, if that makes sense. I think the older generations have a hard time accepting that as easily as like the younger generation. Obviously there's exceptions to all of this, but I think it's a really interesting discussion throughout this book, and I really appreciated it because it's really relevant that to all of us, the world is changing, and it was really nice to read about a situation like this. Really wouldn't have made sense, like 15, 20 years ago. This entire story really couldn't have been written that long ago. It is a very new issue, and I just think it was really well done, and I think it's a really interesting story that was going to continue to be relevant in the future as well. Yeah, so overall I would say this book has a lot of merit for a lot of different reasons, whether you're interested in the romance, the characters themselves, or just like a good story overall, some treatment of mental health issues, that's great as well. But ultimately, like, I just feel like there's a lot of really interesting things in here that a lot of people could enjoy and get a lot out of. This book is like a message with heart, and it's just so fun and a lot of times too, but it's also very real, so it deals with some difficult issues, but I think it does it really well and it handles it really well, and that again I think is attributed to the writing, which I thought was just really well done. So yeah, I would highly recommend this book. I think it is really, really good. I think it's definitely worth your time. So that is my review of Eliza and Her Monsters. Please let me know what you think in the comments, and as always, thank you so much for watching this video, and until next time.